It was a desolate land. Howling winds wreaked havoc upon the land's frozen surface. Heavy woodland prevented vehicles from passage, and the heavy snowfall made the transportation of equipment nearly impossible. Waist-high snow drastically reduced movement of troops, and the few roads available for passage naturally created choke points for any force daring enough to travel through. The environment alone made this land a deadly battlefield, and the addition of tactical, highly adapted defenders created a nightmare for the Russian invaders. This is the desperate 100-day winter war, and welcome to Beyond the Battlefield. Finland, an Arctic country whose neighbors are Sweden to the west and Russia to the east. Finland is home to over 5.5 million people. With a 99% literacy rate and exceptional healthcare, the country ranks number 1 in the annual UN World Happiness Report. Angry Birds, a popular mobile game with 2 movies based on it, was created by Rovio, a Finnish company. Thanks to this happy country, we have ice skates, heart rate monitors, and wind turbines. And most parents would know of Nokia phones, which are still one of the most durable and longest-lasting mobile phones to date. Despite all of the country's great inventions and lifestyles, Finland has had its fair share of troubles hidden in a cold past. Troubles that almost ended the country itself. October 1939. Things were heating up in Europe. As the Soviet Union and Germany finished their invasion of Poland, the Soviets were getting nervous about Germany's lust for territory. Expecting the worst, the Union took precautions and set up a buffer zone in the area around the city of Leningrad, the second biggest industrial plant in Russia. Negotiations began with several nations, one of which was Finland. Ignoring their declaration of neutrality, the Soviets requested Finland to hand over several thousand kilometers of land, of which consisted of a few key defensive structures and ports. In return, the Union offered double the amount in worthless, barren land located in Karelia. Finland naturally declined the offer. However, the Union was not going to take a no for an answer. On November 30th of 1939, 500,000 Soviet soldiers forced their way through the previous borders dividing Finland from the Soviet Union. The Finnish were taken by surprise, for there was never even a declaration of war that hinted towards a possible invasion. Land was immediately lost in the major offensive, and Helsinki, the capital of Finland, was bombed. Finnish forces retreated, not prepared to face such a well-equipped and mechanically superior invader. Soviet forces continued to push forward, but efforts were slowed as the geography of the Arctic nation took its toll on the Soviet forces. Frozen woodland covered most of northern Finland, which drastically slowed the advancement of equipment and tanks. To the south, the fortified and ultimately impenetrable Mannerheim Line, a staggered line of concrete bunkers and heavy defenses, prevented a breakthrough into southeastern Finland. The climate was also unbearable, with thousands of Soviet troops suffering from starvation and frostbite each day. The land was unforgiving to those who aren't prepared for the harshest of conditions. Already, the invaders had made some terrible mistakes in their lack of preparation and organization. For all these miscalculations, the Soviets' biggest mistake was underestimating their ruthless opponent, the Finnish. The one key difference between the Soviet forces and the small Finnish army was the determination the Finns had against their attackers. Their country was being invaded, so they fought as though they had nothing left to lose. Lucky for the Soviets, these attributes became futile on several occasions during the conflict, for the poor quality weapons the Finns possessed got in the way of victory. You see, the Finnish had never really fought in war before, resulting in their weapons having to be cobbled together from what was available. This consisted of privately owned rifles, the very few guns owned by law enforcement, and other weaponry dating all the way back to the 1890s. One infamous weapon was a 13mm heavy machine gun. It would work perfectly fine in the short Finnish summer, but would freeze up and jam in the winter. This presented a problem, since Finland is an Arctic nation with temperatures that remained below freezing from November to March. Weapons like these then had to be employed against the Russians' modern automatic weapons. As you can see, this led to inevitable casualties. What the Finnish lacked in weapons, they made up for in tactics. Being well adapted to their homeland also increased the Finns' ability to conquer obstacles regarding the terrain and temperature. While the Soviets were forced to trudge through the waist-high snow, the Finnish troops used snowshoes, skis, and even rode caribou to swiftly and stealthily cross the ground. While the Russian soldiers struggled with the freezing temperatures and starvation, the Finnish were fed warm, fatty foods to keep their bellies filled and keep them warm in the freezing temperatures. Along with this, special tactics were developed to counter the Soviets' heavy vehicles and road-bound tanks. This included blockading the few roads that weaved through the dense northern forest to flanking and surrounding enemy troops with small attack squads. Since there were no anti-tank weapons that could destroy the Russian tanks head-on, the Finns devised a strategy known as moti to deal with enemy armored columns. The term meant to chop up firewood into small and manageable pieces, and the strategy was very similar. Finnish squads would attack from the sides and separate the tanks from one another. Once separated, the Finns would then destroy the vehicles one by one. The Finns were clearly not going to be pushed around. However, after almost 100 days, the small yet powerful Finnish stand crumbled. While still mostly being able to hold off the Soviets in the north, the only barrier between the Soviets and full-scale invasion, the Mannerheim Line, fell after a major Soviet attack penetrated the line. The reason for the amazing fight the Finns put up was the hope of getting reinforcements from the British and French. They didn't get help. The Soviets did get the ceasefire and surrender they desired, however with heavy casualties. The Soviets took the land they had originally desired from the Finns. Luckily, they left the rest of the country alone. Though Finland had technically lost the war, it had left a mark on history. During the 100-day conflict, Hitler observed the reports of the fighting in Finland with awe. He believed it was ridiculous that the Soviets, with their millions of soldiers and modern weaponry, could not easily defeat the small and introverted country of Finland. Hitler, now seriously doubting the fighting capabilities of the Soviets, came up with the idea of Operation Barbarossa. The Finnish were the reason Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. You might think this is the end, but there is one more trick up my sleeve. One last mark the Winter War had left on the world. Earlier in the conflict, after Helsinki was bombed, the world was shocked and frustrated with the Soviets for the unannounced invasion of a neutral country. As a result, the Soviet Union was banished from the League of Nations. To try to calm things down, the Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov made a public announcement on the radio. He proclaimed that, rather than dropping explosives on the Finnish cities, The Soviet bomber planes were dropping food for the hungry Finnish civilians. Meanwhile, Finnish soldiers were developing an easy-to-produce anti-tank grenade. The weapon the Finns had devised was a handheld firebomb made by filling a glass bottle with alcohol and stuffing a rag through the top. To use, this rag was lit on fire, and the whole package was thrown at the target, resulting in a splash of ongoing fire. With a dark sense of humor, the Finnish soldiers claimed this weapon was the drink to go with the food that the Soviets were dropping. The Molotov cocktail was born. I'm your host, Gabriel Brooker. The script, graphics, and podcast are all created by me, with music provided by WeVideo and additional sound effects from freesound.com. Information gathered from over a dozen sources, so listing them would be a difficult task. However, please feel inclined to research on your own. This episode couldn't have happened without the help of my mom, Kristen Brooker, who compiled most of the information used in this episode. She is a teacher at Booth Middle School and, ironically, is of 100% Finnish descent. Join me next time on Beyond the Battlefield.